Hi, everybody, and welcome to Chapter 3, Theories of Delinquency. So we're going to go over some theories, and of course there is a full-blown theory class here at Hack. I am one who teach it. Please take it. It's a great course. But there are theories that are specific to explaining childhood offending. And so we're going to go over a handful of those today. So we're going to start with, some of this will be review, some of it will be new if you've had my theory class. But we're going to start with Sykes and Matz's techniques of neutralization theory. And they argue that becoming delinquent is a learning process. It happens through learning experiences. Sykes and Matza argue that most adolescents hold conventional values and norms about what's right, what's wrong, what's legal, what's illegal, and by and large follow the rules, right? But when they deviate and when they engage in crime, they have to find a way to neutralize those moral codes and those moral rules and those legal stipulations that they usually adhere to. So they would argue that most delinquents are not committed to a delinquent lifestyle, right? That there's kids who just deviate here and there once or twice. That is not a chronic adolescent offender. And it's because it's these one-offs that delinquency is looked at as a rare deviation that they just have to break out the neutralization every now and again to neutralize their belief system to allow them to deviate into something they otherwise would morally disagree with. So that's sort of the question is how, if they believe in right versus wrong, legal versus illegal, how can they engage in illegal activities or wrong behaviors? Well, they do it by neutralizing those beliefs during the time that it takes for them to commit the crime. So they learn the technique of neutralization, and it allows them to drift away. It allows them to drift into criminality. So there are 5 techniques of neutralization that Sykes and Matza argue adolescents engage in. And these techniques allow them to be momentarily free to engage in crime. And the first is denial of responsibility. They're going to argue that the behavior was an accident or that it was from a force beyond their control, right? I had a really bad home life, and that's why I did that. Or, I wouldn't have done that, but I was with John, and John's a bad guy. Like, John's always in trouble. He made me do it, right? It's somebody else's responsibility. Or I live in a high crime area, and so it's just it's not my fault, right? So that would be denial of responsibility. Or I didn't mean to do it. Well, okay, you still did, right? But having that neutralization allows you the opportunity to do it. The second is denial of injury, and this is when a juvenile is going to deny the wrongfulness of their actions. Or they're going to express a belief that their offense didn't really cause harm. So, for example, I went out and vandalized a car. It's okay. The guy has insurance, right? It's not really an injury. It'll get fixed, right? That's what he pays for insurance for, right? So denying that you did harm. Number 3 is denial of the victim, right? And this is utilized to justify delinquent acts where somebody was harmed, and you rationalize that either they weren't really harmed or they weren't harmed that badly, or it doesn't matter that they were harmed because you think that you disapprove of their actions. We often refer to this as victim blaming in sort of the zeitgeist. That's what we refer to, denial of the victim. Like, that guy's always been a jerk, so he needed to get the shit beat out of him, right? Like, that idea that, like, he needed an ass kicking. If someone needed it, it was that guy. So therefore, it doesn't really count. It's not really victim. It's not really a victim, right? Even though he actually really is. It's that neutralization that person's awful, or, somebody needs to knock him on his ass so he learns to not do X, Y, and Z. That is that denial of the victim that allows them to engage in that physical assault. Number 4 is going to be the condemnation of the condemners. And this is when a juvenile will try to shift blame to somebody else by focusing on their motivations and their behaviors, the motivations and the behaviors of the people who disapprove of their actions. So, for example, if an adolescent got arrested for getting into a fight, he might look at the officer and say, well, I've seen officers all over the media. I've seen you guys beat people up. So this wasn't wrong. You do it all the time. That's condemning the condemners, right? The people who are coming on the scene to enforce the law saying, okay, what you did was wrong. Well, they're just going to turn that table right back and you say, well, you do it all the time, so why can't I? Right? And they're going to shift the responsibility of the actual action, which gives them the opportunity to deviate into engaging in that crime. And finally, number 5, the fifth neutralization is appealing to higher loyalties. This neutralization occurs when juveniles allow their peer group to take precedence over the rules of society. So I only did it to help a friend. My friend needed help. You know, shouldn't I be helpful to my friends? Right? This idea that I was helping's good, right? So I'm appealing to a higher loyalty. My friends are really important. So it allows me to put those laws and those rules on hold for a minute to do this illegal act. So that's Sykes and Mott's explanation. That's how they argue why kids engage in delinquency. We're going to shift to Travis Hershey. He's one of my favorites. His social control or social bonding theory, those terms are used interchangeably. So if you hear one, it means the same thing as the other. But he argues, that the reason kids don't engage in delinquency, he looks at the ones who are following the rules and he says, why are you following the rules? And he says, you know what? Because they have strong bonds to society. The kids that have weak bonds to society or no bonds to society are the ones who engage in delinquency. Why? Because they're not bonded. So he argues there's 4 bonds, and we're going to go through the 4 bonds, and that whenever any one of these bonds are weakened or broken, it gives the opportunity for adolescents to deviate into delinquency. So the first one is the attachment bond, and this is going to be your emotional and psychological ties with other people, but most importantly, your parents, right? So it's going to be siblings, it's going to be friends, your attachment to the people that are important in your life. You care what they think. You care that they will be upset with you if you do fill in the blank. You don't want them to be angry with you. You don't want them to think less of you or be embarrassed by you. So you have a bond that's strong enough that I'm not going to do this because I'm attached to these people and I risk those attachments if I do this. Or I care what they think, right? I have people to lose and I don't want to lose them. The second is commitment, and commitment is the time, energy, and effort that's going to be expended into conventional activities. So this is going to be somebody who is in sports, or somebody who's in band, or they have a job, something that they value, some activity that they're a part of, they're committed to, it's important to them, and they don't want to risk it. That, look, if I get caught doing XYZ illegal activity, I'm going to be kicked off the football team. And I'm committed to the football team. I don't want to be kicked off the football team, right? So that's it, and I don't want to risk those commitments. I always like to teach this, that there's always that one kid in high school who, like, he's always getting into trouble, but somehow he holds it together during the football season, right? Because he has a strong commitment bond. It really means something to him. It's of value to him. The third bond is going to be involvement, the involvement bond. And this is where we use that old phrase, because it's so true, that idle hands are the devil's playground. So those who are uninvolved, those who don't have much going on in life, will find something to fill their time. And it will probably be something bad, right? It will usually not be productive. It won't be pro-social. So kids who are involved in sports, in activities, kids who have after-school jobs, kids who volunteer their time for charities or what have you, are less likely to commit time simply because they don't have the time or the energy. They've got so much going on that they don't have time to get in trouble. And on the rare occasion when they do, they're too tired, right? Between school, activities, work, like, I just want to sit down and watch TV. Like, I have no desire to get up and do stuff and get into trouble. So the involvement bond. And finally, the fourth bond is belief. And the belief bond is the internalization and the acceptance of moral authority and the law and why it should be okay. So believing in a right versus wrong and being committed to that belief that I don't do things because I don't do that because it's wrong and I believe it's wrong. So that's how Hershey explains juvenile delinquency. It's anytime one of these bonds is weakened or missing, and certainly if more than one is weakened or missing, you're going to start seeing deviation into delinquency. So if you want to, stave off delinquency, you want to have an active relationship with your kids. You want to have your kids involved in activities. You want your kids to believe in a moral code, or at the very least in the legal code, right? If you can do that, the likelihood that they will deviate into delinquency is much lower than it would be otherwise. Next, we're going to talk about containment theory. This is authored by a theorist named Walter Reckless. And this theory focuses on internal and external factors that are at work when a juvenile engages in delinquent acts. He argues that there's both internal and external factors that stop the juvenile from committing crime, but there's also internal and external factors that encourage the juvenile to commit crime. So first, there's going to be inner pressures and pulls. And these are going to be things that push juveniles towards delinquency. Things like their needs, their wants, money, stuff that they don't have, right? Feelings of restlessness, the need for immediate gratification. Obviously, the first example that comes to mind here is going to be theft, right? That they have their needs, their wants. I don't want to wait to earn the money to get it, so I'm just going to take it. Next are inner containments, and this is going to inhibit delinquency. These are personal controls that keep delinquency in check. Things like self-esteem, self-value, that's beneath me. I'm not going to do that. I take the high road. Strongly internalized moral codes, strong internalized sense of responsibility. That I am law-abiding. I take pride in that. I'm not going, and that's going to keep me away from those temptations. There's also other pressures and pulls that result in delinquent behavior. So these are going to be things like your peer group, unemployment, homelessness, things that are going to force delinquency, right? If a kid is and their family is homeless, they don't have enough money for food, or they don't have money to meet their needs, they're going to be pulled into delinquency to get those needs met. There are also outer containments, and this is what's going to inhibit delinquent behavior. So these are going to be forces that provide discipline and supervision over their behavior. So this is going to be examples like your parents, teachers at school, coaches, police, the juvenile justice system. Kids know what their response is going to be and what the consequences are going to be as a result of those outer containments, so it keeps them from engaging in delinquency. Reckless argues that whatever is the strongest and most dominant is what will rule behavior. That if self-esteem and responsibility and those outer containments are a bigger presence in a child's life, you're not going to have a child who engages in delinquency. But if those are absent, right, and those inner pressures are at work, then you're going to have a kid that engages in delinquency. Which one is stronger? Which one has a greater presence in the adolescent's life? The final theory, final form of theory we're going to talk about for adolescents is labeling theory. And labeling theory comes from a guy named Lemmert. And labeling theory is never interested in that first act of delinquency. It's not interested in explaining that, but it's interested in explaining all the delinquency that comes after that first act, which we call secondary deviance. According to Lemmert, secondary deviance only occurs when the juvenile is caught engaging in delinquency. Because once they're caught, they are now brought into the formal system. Once you're brought into the formal system, you are now labeled. You are now a delinquent. You are now adjudicated a delinquent. And once that label is applied, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Whereas if the kid engaged in misbehavior one time, was never caught, was never given a label, it would have been a blip on the screen. Life goes on. Things are fine. They're going to continue to just, be a law-abiding citizen that grows up. But Lemmert argues that once that label has been applied and once you've been brought into that formal institution of the juvenile justice system, you are now tagged, you are now stigmatized. And the weight of that label will create the behavior that the label is trying to identify, right? That people will only see you as a delinquent, so they will treat you as a delinquent, which means eventually you will begin to believe that you are a delinquent, and your behaviors will conform to other people's expectations, and it will perpetuate subsequent delinquency. Lemmert's argument is the best thing to do here is to never, ever, ever handle anything formally with juvenile delinquents. If you don't handle it formally, if you don't bring them into the system, it'll be a blip on the radar. But if you bring them into the system, you're actually going to perpetuate delinquency and arguably create subsequent adult criminality. Now, just a few other issues and explanations that are not formal theories, but they're out there. Modeling is a big one. It's a form of learning that argues that when juveniles see somebody behaving in a certain way, they imitate it, or they model it. So if you see your siblings doing it or your parents doing it, that you internalize those behaviors and you begin to mimic them. when those behaviors are not punished, this is going to result in an increase in aggressive behavior. This is a controversial argument, but there's the argument, it's been around a long time, that they model video games, violent television, violence in, music videos, social media. Could that be a form of modeling that results in crime? There's a relationship in the research, but it's not at all clear whether it's a short-term relationship, meaning, maybe they get a little aggressive after exposure to video games for, a short period of time. Or is this a long-term relationship that once you're exposed to those violent crimes, it gets in there and it stays in there? We don't know yet. The research is not settled on that issue. Conduct disorder is another big explanation for delinquency, and that is a mental health diagnosis specific to small children. It is the precursor to adult psychopathy. It's characterized by a lack of feelings, a lack of empathy, a lack of sympathy, an inability to experience remorse for actions. And this is largely caused, we see that kids who are identified or diagnosed with conduct disorder tend to experience parental neglect, parental rejection, and or inconsistent application of harsh physical discipline, so that they can never really predict what's going to result in a consequence here. What shouldn't I do to avoid a consequence because of that inconsistent harsh discipline? We also see that high rates of conduct disorder among kids who have been physically and sexually abused. There's the argument that diet can contribute to delinquent behavior, that certain foods, vitamins, minerals have been linked to delinquency. Excessive sugar intake is one of them, high calcium intake, too little vitamin B, too little vitamin C, too much vitamin C, too much magnesium, too much zinc have all been linked to aggressive behaviors in children. Fetal alcohol syndrome, or any sort of drug use while the child is in utero, has been linked with subsequent delinquency. The general thought process here is that there's an interruption in development in utero, in brain development while the fetus is developing, that will have long-term consequences that can result in delinquency and subsequent adult criminality. Learning disabilities are another explanation. There's a strong relationship between learning disabilities and juvenile delinquency. Learning disabilities that go undiagnosed and therefore untreated really inhibits a child's ability to learn, which results in frustration, it results in anger, it results in feelings of low self-esteem, and their inability to successfully complete school. This is going to result in greater likelihood of high school dropping out, people who don't have marketable skills to get legitimate jobs to provide a living wage, etc. And just acting out from the frustration and the anger, and again we get back to that idea of the label of being stupid or whatever, when in fact they're not stupid or incapable, they just have a learning disability that never was diagnosed and therefore was never managed. And the last one is always a catch-all for all crime, and that's going to be poverty, right? Poverty drives all crime, and juvenile delinquency is no different.